The storm clawed at the cabin like a beast denied its prey, rain lashing the windows in relentless sheets that blurred the world beyond into a gray void. Major Grace Winters sat motionless in the dim glow of a single lamp, her fingers tracing the edges of a crumpled photograph. Her unit frozen in time. Smiles etched before the ambush shattered everything. Inside her mind, the echoes of explosions reverberated, not as sounds, but as hollow aches, pulling her deeper into the numbness that had become her armor. She wondered in that silent void if the guilt would ever stop whispering that she should have died with them. The cabin crouched on the edge of a forgotten forest, its weathered logs groaning under the wind's assault, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and pine resin that seeped through cracks like invading memories. Inside, relics of her military life cluttered the space. A faded beret on a hook dog tags dangling like ghosts, and empty whiskey bottles scattered across the scarred wooden table, each one a testament to nights spent drowning the screams. Outside, lightning cracked the sky, illuminating fleeting shadows that danced unnaturally among the trees. Perhaps just branches, but Grace's instincts, honed by years of command, prickled with unease. A distant rumble, not thunder, but something mechanical, hummed on the edge of hearing, a subtle harbinger that her isolation was fracturing, that the past was stalking closer, cloaked in the storm's fury. Grace's hands trembled as she set the photograph down her eyes, refusing its faces, each one a knife twisting deeper into the guilt that anchored her to this purgatory. Her mind flickered unbidden to that night, the ambush's roar, the screams of her unit, the moment she'd ordered Blitz to advance, only for him to vanish in the chaos, her failure sealing their disgrace. She whispered, "I should have seen it," the words slipping out like a confession to the empty room, her tough exterior fracturing in the silence. No tears came, only a hollow ache, a numbness that paralyzed her, as if her heart had learned to mimic the stillness of the dead. Her fingers clenched the table's edge nails, digging into wood, a futile anchor against the flood of self-loathing that threatened to drown her. A faint scratch clawed at the cabin door, sharp against the storm's dull roar, snapping Grace's gaze upward, her pulse spiking like a tripped alarm. The sound wasn't the wind's doing. It was deliberate, alive, carrying a weight that stirred something buried in her chest. She rose, breath shallow, and peered through the rain-streaked window, seeing only shadows, until a low, broken whine pierced the gale, raw and desperate, like a plea from a ghost she thought she'd lost. Blitz, it had to be Blitz. His presence loomed beyond the door, a promise of upheaval wrapped in the storm's embrace, hinting that the past wasn't done with her yet. Once Major Grace Winters had been a beacon of command, her voice cutting through the chaos of war zones, like a blade leading her unit with Blitz at her side. His eyes sharp and unwavering, a German shepherd who could sniff out danger before it bloomed. 3 years ago, in a dust-choked valley that whirled, crumbled, and ambush gunfire spitting from shadows, her orders failing as men fell, and Blitz vanished, left behind in a betrayal she didn't yet understand. The mission's failure branded her a pariah, forcing her retirement. Now, in the cabin's isolation, she lived among ghosts, her vibrancy replaced by regret that clung like damp rot, each memory a reminder of the lives she couldn't save. She'd lost her unit, her purpose, and Blitz her fault, always her fault, leaving her to haunt this cabin, a shell of the commander. She'd been her heart, a barren field where hope no longer grew. Grace's days bled into one another, a monochrome loop of silence, broken only by the clink of whiskey bottles and the rustle of old maps she studied, without purpose, as if answers might hide in their creases. The cabin's stale air, heavy with dust and unwashed clothes mirrored her stagnation, its walls a fortress against the world she'd fled. She avoided mirrors, fearing the stranger in her own eyes, her once steady hands now unsteady, without a glass to grip. Nightmares came like clockwork, jerking her awake to stare at the ceiling, where shadows danced, like the ambush's muzzle flashes. She lived mechanically, eat, drink, sleep, repeat, her tough exterior, a brittle shield numbing the guilt that whispered she didn't deserve to feel anything else. Blitz had been a shadow of precision, a German shepherd whose every muscle was honed for war, his senses sharp enough to detect a threat through smoke and chaos, always at Grace's side, her unspoken extension in the field. 3 years ago, in the ambush's hellfire, he'd been ordered forward only to be abandoned. Deliberately, he'd later learned left to scavengers who caged him, their rough hands and sharp prods carving scars into his flank and mistrust into his soul. Decommissioned, sent to a sterile facility for euthanasia. He bore faded wounds, a limp in his left leg, a notched ear, eyes that no longer gleamed but smoldered with betrayal's weight. His survival instinct kept him alive, growling at handlers, retreating into silence, his loyalty to Grace buried beneath layers of pain, yet flickering faintly, like a signal flare in a storm, driving him to escape into the night, to find her. In the cabin's dim hush, Grace and Blitz were twin specters of loss, their emptiness echoing in the way they flinched at sudden sounds, her at the crack of thunder, him at the clatter of a dropped spoon, each a reflex of wounds unhealed. She sat rigid, staring at maps that led nowhere, while he curled in the corner, eyes tracking her with a wariness that mirrored her own guarded heart. Neither approached, yet neither fled, their pain intertwined in silence. Her guilt over the ambush matched his abandonment's sting, their trust eroded by betrayal's slow acid. Subtle gestures, a shared glance when the wind howled, her hand pausing near his untouched water bowl, began to weave a fragile thread, hinting that their brokenness might find solace in the other's presence, a quiet promise of healing yet to come. The storm's fury battered the cabin door, splintering the night's fragile quiet, when a heavy thud jolted Grace from her stupor, her heart lurching like a misfired round. Through the rain-smeared window, lightning flashed, revealing Blitz collapsed on the porch, his black and tan fur matted with blood, and mud eyes glinting with desperate recognition as they locked onto hers. His ragged breaths rasped against the wind's howl, each one a plea, his scarred body trembling from exhaustion. And cold, a soldier returned from a war neither had won. The sight pierced Grace, a visceral shock that stirred memories of his steady presence in battle, now reduced to this broken form, urging her toward a choice she wasn't ready to make. Grace froze her hand on the door's latch, logic screaming to leave Blitz outside. Reopening that wound would only deepen her guilt, drag her back to the ambush's ghosts. What if he's tracked? What if they're coming? Her mind hissed fear of caring, clashing with the empathy clawing at her chest. Yet his faint whine, raw and unguarded, cut through her defenses, echoing the loyalty she'd failed. She saw herself in his sunken eyes, both abandoned by the system they'd served. That single sound, fragile, insistent, tipped the scale, compelling her to act, though her heart trembled at the cost of letting him back in. Grace flung the door open, rain stinging her face as she knelt beside Blitz, his low growl vibrating through the storm's din, a warning born of mistrust. Her hands unsteady from disuse, and whiskey fumbled with his sodden fur, dragging his trembling frame inside, leaving smears of mud and blood on the floorboards. It was clumsy, her grip too tight. his body rigid with caution. She whispered, "You're safe now," more to herself than him, as she pressed a towel to a gash on his flank, the act sealing a pact she couldn't undo. Blitz's eyes sharp, despite pain, watched her every move, his stillness a fragile bridge between their shared ruins, marking the moment she chose to fight for him. In the cabin's flickering light, Grace set a bowl of water near Blitz, her movements deliberate, offering space as he sniffed it warily, his tongue darting briefly before retreating. She scavenged old blankets, piling them into a corner where he could rest her breath, catching when he limped toward them, collapsing with a sigh that echoed her own exhaustion. No words passed, but his slow blink, a soldier's acknowledgement, forged a silent vow. She'd keep him alive, and he'd let her try. This impulsive act, born of pity and recognition, bound them in a fragile trust, the first step toward healing a wound neither could name. Blitz claimed the cabin's shadowed corner, his body pressed against the wall, eyes glinting like polished obsidian, as he tracked Grace's every move, a low growl rumbling when she stepped too close. She respected the boundary, her own silence mirroring his, her hands busy with mundane tasks, stacking dishes, folding maps to avoid spooking him. The air between them was taut heavy with mutual wariness. His scarred flank rose and fell unevenly, each breath a reminder of his ordeal, while Grace's tight jaw betrayed her own guarded heart. Both of them soldiers, too broken to bridge the gap yet. Their shared stillness spoke louder than words, a fragile standoff, where neither dared to demand trust, only watched, waiting for the other to yield first. Grace knelt by Blitz's side, her fingers steadying a cloth soaked in antiseptic, dabbing at the crusted gash on his leg as he stiffened, a faint snarl fading into a tremor under her touch. The sting mirrored the raw ache in her chest, guilt over his abandonment surfacing like blood. She offered a piece of bread from her sparse meal, placing it near his paws, and he watched it for a long moment before nosing it closer, his wary gaze never leaving her face. In that shared silence, their wounds, his physical, hers unseen, wove a quiet connection, each small act of care a step toward understanding. Blitz's slow chewing, her shallow breaths, filled the cabin with a tentative warmth, their pain a bridge where words couldn't tread. A chipped mug slipped from Grace's hand, shattering on the cabin floor with a crack that echoed like gunfire, jolting her back to the ambush. Blitz's bark sharp in her memory, his form darting through smoke as her orders faltered. Blitz's head snapped up his own bark, erupting raw and sudden, not at her, but at the ghost of that chaos, his eyes wide with the same haunted recognition she felt. She froze, meeting his gaze, and instead of retreating, he held still, ears twitching as if the sound had tethered them across time. The shared flinch, the echo of their past, wove a silent thread of understanding. Grace's whispered, "It's okay, boy," was met with his pause, a small surrender, their wounds speaking where words failed. Grace tore a strip of jerky, holding it out with a steadiness she hadn't felt in years, and Blitz, after a long stare, crept forward, snatching it from her hand, his tongue brushing her fingers, a spark of warmth in the cabin's chill. Her lips twitched, a half laugh, escaping the sound foreign like sunlight breaking through a storm. Blitz's tail flicked a hesitant wag, his eyes softening for the first time. They sat in that moment, the fire's crackle filling the silence, the air no longer heavy, but alive with possibility. Grace tossed another piece, and he caught it mid-air, a playful leap that stirred a memory of training drills, the cabin, briefly a haven, where fear loosened its grip. Grace woke, gasping from a nightmare. The ambush's screams still wringing her sweat-soaked shirt, clinging like a second skin as she clutched the cabin's rough blanket. In the dim firelight, Blitz stirred from his corner, his eyes catching hers, not with wariness, but with a quiet knowing. He rose, limping, and crossed the room, his scarred muzzle nudging her trembling hand. The weight of his head against her palm, warm and heavy, unleashed a sob she'd buried for years. Blitz leaned closer, his breath steadying her own, a silent surrender that spoke of trust, forged in shared ruin, binding them in a moment where fear gave way to something unshakable, a vow sealed without words. Blitz's low growl sliced through the cabin's quiet, his ears pinned back eyes, fixed on the window where shadows flickered beyond the rain's steady drum. Grace's pulse quickened, her own nightmares, still fresh images of the ambush blending with the creak of floorboards now sounding too deliberate, too close. Blitz paced, his hackles raised, barking at unseen threats, his instincts sharper than hers, sensing danger she couldn't yet name. The air thickened with tension, the past's echo creeping closer, whispering through the storm that their fragile peace was unraveling, that something, or someone, was watching, waiting to strike. A sharp knock rattled the cabin door, and Blitz's growl erupted into a snarl, his body low eyes blazing with recognition as a shadow loomed outside, a familiar figure from the ambush, Captain Holt, the rogue soldier. Grace's shout, "Stay back," cracked like a whip, her voice raw with panic, as memories flooded Holt's smirk, in the debrief his absence when Blitz was left behind. Blitz, lunged teeth, bared his aggression, a mirror of Grace's surging fear, both triggered by the betrayal's sting. She yanked him back, her hands shaking, heart-pounding, with the realization that the mission's failure was no accident. Holt's cold laugh through the door. "You're still blind." Winters sent them both reeling, withdrawing into a tense silence, their shared trauma, a live wire sparking between them. Holt kicked the door open, his silhouette filling the frame, a gun glinting as he sneered. "The dogs chipped Winters' data from the arms deal you botched." Grace's mind reeled, the staged mission's truth crashing down. Blitz microchipped with evidence was why they'd been betrayed. Blitz broke free, lunging at Holt, teeth sinking into his arm, as Grace scrambled for her old service pistol. The cabin erupting in chaos, furniture toppling, shouts blending with growls. Holt's gun fired wildly, grazing Blitz's flank, but Grace's shot found his shoulder, forcing him to flee into the storm, leaving her and Blitz panting, bloodied, locked in a primal standoff that exposed their enemies and cemented their resolve to fight. The cabin fell silent, the storm's howl muted by the weight of what had just passed. Grace sank to the floor, her pistol clattering beside her, regret seeping through her veins like cold rain for the chaos she'd failed to foresee. Blitz limped to the far corner, blood dripping from his grazed flank, his eyes averted, mirroring her own withdrawal as they both grappled with the ambush's reopened scars. In the quiet, she reached out her hand, hovering near his trembling form, not touching, but close enough to feel his warmth. His slow glance back, steady, despite pain, was a silent promise they'd protect each other, sealing a bond forged in the wreckage of betrayal. The space between them, once a chasm, now held the weight of shared survival, a vow to face the threat together. Dawn broke gray and heavy, the forest's stillness a lie, as Grace and Blitz slipped from the cabin, her pack heavy with supplies, his senses razor-sharp, ears twitching at every snap of a twig. Footprints in the mud, too fresh, too deliberate, confirmed her former unit was closing in their pursuit, relentless, drawn by the microchip secrets buried in Blitz's flesh. In the city's shadowed alleys, headlights flared behind them, engines growling like predators. Blitz's low whine urged her to move faster, his watchfulness catching glimpses of figures trailing them. Tension coiled tighter, with each step, the air thick with the scent of oil and danger. Their path, a narrowing thread, leading to an inevitable clash. In a derelict warehouse, the chase ended, the air thick with rust, and the echo of distant sirens, as Captain Holt and two armed soldiers cornered Grace and Blitz, their silhouettes stark against flickering fluorescent lights. Holt's voice cut through hand, "Over the dog, Winters, or you both die." His gun trained on her. The microchip's data, their prize. Blitz's growl vibrated low. His body coiled, despite the blood seeping from his wound, while Grace's hand tightened on her pistol, her strength waning from exhaustion and injury. The standoff teetered on a razor's edge, Holt's finger twitching on the trigger, the moment swelling with imminent loss, as the truth of their betrayal Blitz left to die. The mission staged hung heavy, demanding a final reckoning. Grace shouted. Blitz run, her voice cracking with desperation. But he stood firm, eyes locked on Holt, defying her order for the first time in his life. As Holt fired, Blitz lunged, teeth sinking into his arm, knocking the gun away. Grace dove forward, tackling a soldier, her shots wild but true, downing the second. Blitz's snarl and her ragged breaths merged in the chaos, their shared resolve transforming fear into action. His defiance, a choice to protect her, hers, to fight for him. Holt fled, bloodied the data's secret safe, their bond sealed in this act of mutual salvation, honor reclaimed in the warehouse's fading echoes. In the sterile hush of a small-town hospital, Grace sat by a cot, where Blitz lay his flank, bandaged, his breaths slow but steady, the antiseptic sting mingling with the faint warmth of his fur under her fingertips. Her own arm was slung, wounds cleaned, but the ache in her chest lingered, an emotional void carved by the warehouse's chaos and the truths it bared. Holt's betrayal, the staged mission, their near loss. Silence draped them, broken only by the soft beep of monitors, each sound a marker of survival, their movements deliberate, minimal, as if testing the fragility of this new peace. Grace's eyes traced Blitz's closed lids, her thoughts quiet, heavy with relief, yet shadowed by the cost of their fight. Back in the cabin, days blurred into soft routines, Grace setting food near Blitz, his tail flicking as he followed her shadow across the room, their eyes meeting in fleeting, steady glances that spoke of trust rebuilt. She'd pause to stroke his head, his warmth grounding her. He'd nudge her hand, a gesture small but heavy, with meaning, mirroring her own tentative steps toward healing. The air carried the scent of pine and fresh bandages, their bond growing in quiet acts, her sitting closer, him resting near her feet. Each look, each touch, wove their recovery, together a slow dance of presence that filled the emptiness with something enduring, their shared scars, a map to redemption. In the early dawn, Grace stepped onto the forest path, the air crisp with mist, her boots crunching softly beside Blitz, who walked close, his limp fading his head, brushing her hand as if to anchor her. Their breaths synced a quiet rhythm under the pines, his steady gaze meeting hers when she paused, a look that held no fear, only trust, raw and unbroken. He pressed his muzzle against her palm, a final gesture that shattered the last of her guilt, its weight lifting like fog, burned away by sunrise. Together they moved forward side by side, their steps a silent vow of rebirth, the shadows of betrayal fading behind them, leaving only the promise of a shared future.